Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming. I'm Jamie Panetta. I'm the SDIS Program Director. So welcome to the San Diego Independent Scholars monthly lecture. So this is the last one actually before our summer break, and then we pick up in September again. If you're interested in getting on our mailing list, if you're not an SDIS member and want to get on the mailing list, please sign in back there. Okay, our speaker today is Professor Gwenyth Mapes, and her talk is titled Frida Kahlo and Her Art. So just a few words about Professor Mapes. She's Professor of Humanities at Grossmont College, and she taught as an Assistant Professor of Humanities at the University of Montana in Missoula. She has degrees in English and religious studies, as well as a minor in creative writing from Hollins University. She has given readings of her poetry in LA for both the Library Girl and the Rorschach reading series. So quite a background here. So today she'll talk about Frida Kahlo and her lifetime. So Professor Bates. Yeah.
And you are seeing this? Okay, so we've figured out our technology, I believe. Let's go back. Most of you know probably a fair amount about Kahlo. Dates 1907 to 54. Hayden Herrera, author of the 1983 biography Frida, wrote, quote, "Her paintings demand fiercely that you look at her." Kirk Varnado, a chief curator at MoMA, Museum of Modern Art, said she clicks with today's sensibilities. Her constant remaking of her identity, her construction of a theater of the self are exactly what preoccupy such contemporary artists as Cindy Sherman or Kiki Smith, and on a more popular level, Madonna, who of course collects her work. Art dealer Marianne Martin, who as founder of Sotheby's Latin American department, presided over the first auction of a Kahlo painting, and that was 1977. It actually went $1,000 below the estimate of 19. Frida has been carved up into little pieces, Martin said. Everyone pulls out that one piece that means something special to them. So we're looking here at a photo, which he would have loved, of the surrealist André Breton. And he was the founder, I suppose we can say, of surrealism. We do say. Surrealism is based on the belief in the superior reality of certain forms of associations, hitherto neglected, in the omnipotence of dream, in the disinterested play of thought. It tends to ruin once and for all other psychic mechanisms and to substitute itself for them in solving all the principal problems of life. It was Breton who described Kahlo's art as, quote, "a ribbon around a bomb." And it was Breton who included Kahlo in the surrealist circle of painters and thinkers. She wasn't thrilled with the name being called a surrealist, but she didn't say no to showing with them. Let's see. There we go. Wanted to show some of the roots of Kahlo because she will incorporate her indigenous roots into, of course, her life and her art. It was of a couple origins. In the context of her time, her contribution as a female toward modernism was remarkable. She shunned the label, as I said, surrealist. She preferred to not label her work unless it related to things that were of utmost importance to her. The workers' struggle. Her political focus was of incredible concern to her throughout her life. Her own personal life as well, that theater of the self. And of course, her indigenous roots in Mexico. She actually didn't like Breton. She found him insufferable, and she never minced words. But she had discovered a soulmate in his wife, the painter Jacqueline Lamba. Kahlo was, most of you know, the first Latin American woman to have a painting in the Louvre. And we'll look at the frame, which she painted in 1938. Her work at the time caused a storm, if you will, in Paris at an exhibition in 1939 entitled Mexique. Let's see. For some reason, the screen sharing says it paused. Is it sharing on your screen? No, it's not. I didn't think it was. It says paused for some reason. Huh. Why is it paused?
Share again and see.
No. Let me get out and try to get back in. Not sure what's going on with the computer. Are we back live? Okay, apologize for that. We're working out technical difficulties here. It takes a village. All right, let's go back. Frida, some photos of her, and the one on the left, she is on the left wearing men's clothes. Her family, speaking of her roots, included her beloved father, an epileptic Jewish man named Guillermo Kahlo, her mother, Mathilde, and her sister, Christina, who was merely 11 months younger than she was. Before Frida arrived, Mathilde had a son who had died a few days after birth. Frida called her family's household sad. She kept repeating that. She assumed something of a son's role in the family. She was certainly her father's favorite and knew it, and the one who most identified with him. Toward the end of her life, Kahlo told her friend, the psychologist Olga Campos, in a clinical interview, quote, "I am in agreement with everything my father taught me and nothing my mother taught me." All right, let's see, we're going back to that again. No, don't know what we're doing. Keeps bringing up this other, your pages.
Top left. Yeah, top left might be exit.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So resuming back. This is a Guillermo Kahlo 1912 photo of the family, and Kahlo is age 5 and is on the front row in the left, not looking particularly happy. Lucien Bloch, close friend of Kahlo's and a disciple of Diego Rivera, I don't think that's an exaggeration to use the word disciple, recalls that about Frida, quote, "She loved her father very much, but Frida did not have these same feelings for her mother." At the age of 6 or 7, Frida contracted polio, got polio, an illness not detected immediately, and her right leg began thinning. She never wore a leg brace or orthopedic shoe. They kept trying to get her to do that, and she just refused. It has been recently suggested that her limp, she had a limp throughout her life, that it led her pelvis and spinal column to twist and deform as she grew, bones still soft in youth. We're looking at some more photos, obviously. She and Rivera met in 22 when Kahlo joined the Mexican Communist Party and sought advice from him, the accomplished painter. He was 20 years her senior. At the time, she was just 15 and he was already 37. We'll talk about the complications of their legalities in marriage. They were married in 1929. They divorced 10 years later in 1939 and then remarried a year after that in 40. But let's talk about the bus accident. 3 years later in 1925, after she was 15, had sought advice from Diego Rivera, she was in a bus accident and it shattered her spine, her pelvis, her collarbone, and all her ribs. Her discovery, bedridden, of painting as her salvation while she was bedridden and recuperating was incredible. She and Diego got reacquainted in 1927, 2 years later, and his early awe at her talent was immediate. His affairs, her abortions, their divorce, 1939, and remarriage in 1940 are all part of her life and her art. Let's see. Yeah. I'm getting full screen on all of this. Whoops. All right, so let's go to that bus accident. Not able to get this to disappear on us. On September 17th, 1925, the bus in which she and her then boyfriend and lover, Alejandro Gomez Arias, were riding was hit broadside by an electric trolley. Kahlo's body was pierced by the trolley's metal handrail. It entered her lower body on the left side and exited through her vagina, tearing its lip. Her spinal column and pelvis were each broken in 3 places, 3 each. Her collarbone and two of the ribs on either side, not all of them, 2 on both sides were broken as well. Her right leg, the one that was already deformed by polio, was shattered and it fractured in 11 places. And if that's not bad enough, her right foot was dislocated and crushed. And you can't make up this. Truth is stranger than fiction. In the impact, somehow, Frida's clothes had been yanked off and she was left completely nude. Gomez Arias, lover boyfriend, recalled someone in the bus, probably a house painter, had been carrying a packet of powdered gold. This package broke and the gold fell all over the bleeding body of Frida. After being hospitalized for a month, she went home to recuperate against doctor's orders. Frida ended bed rest prematurely and she healed poorly. Her relationship with Gomez Arias ended despite Kahlo's love letters, plural, sent pleadingly to him during her recovery. Kahlo would have over 30 operations performed on her during her life. You're looking at, in black and white, the broken column, which she painted in 1944. We'll look at it again. On September 17th, that accident that changed her life left her in pain for the rest of her life. She was never without significant pain issues. It also left her unable to carry a pregnancy to full term. 1 year after the accident, she sketched the accident in the style of the traditional Mexican ex voto paintings. It's a Catholic folk art tradition. It's highly syncretic, really. It's Catholic, but it's indigenous as well. So it's folk syncretism. And it's the ex voto paintings depict individual people's misfortunes. And they are in and of themselves votive prayer offerings for getting better, healing, that sort of thing. I want to note that about 65 of her approximately 150 works that she produced depicted herself. Quote, "There have been 2 great accidents in my life. One was the trolley, and the other was Diego. Diego was by far the worst." You're looking at a part of a mural painted by Diego Rivera, and this detail section is called the Arsenal. The entire thing is the Ballad of the Revolution. Kahlo and Diego, as I said, would meet again, and they met through mutual communist acquaintances. And they were reintroduced in 1928 by the mutual friend, Italian photographer, Tina Madati, whose work, by the way, I adore. Was a wonderful photographer. She'd arrived in Mexico at the time with Edward Weston, who she was seeing for a while. And that was in 1923. While Rivera was frescoing Mexico City's Ministry of Education building, with paintings tucked under her arm, Kahlo showed up on site and demanded, didn't ask, walked right up to him and demanded, "Here's my work, please critique it right now." They were married in 1929. Also want to note that Diego's murals were an inspiration for FDR's work, the WPA, a Workers' Progress Administration. which lasted from 35 to 43. In San Diego, you probably know, we have lots of WPA art here in a variety of ways and places, mediums and places. Here's a bigger detail, again, not of the whole mural, Ballad of the Revolution, but the arsenal detail showing Kahlo in the center. And she, of course, is handing out weapons. Kahlo and Diego, here's another photo of them. And this is 2 days after their first marriage in 1929. So, as I said, she met Rivera when she was 15. At the time, she was attending the all-female National Preparatory School, and he was hired to paint the walls of the auditorium. Much later, when interviewed, she said about her body, because she painted herself so much, the most important part of the body is the brain. Of my face, I like the eyebrows and the eyes. Aside from that, I like nothing. My head is too small, my breasts and genitals, average. Of the opposite sex, I have the mustache, and in general, the face. Lucienne Bloch says Frida always carefully groomed her mustache and unibrow with a little comb that she carried with her. Another of her paintings here, Frida and Diego Rivera. She painted this in 31. As I said, she married him twice. The first was 29 when they were living in the Bay Area of California. You'll notice in this piece, artwork of hers, that the ribbon that is pinched in the beak of the pigeon, not a dove, but a pigeon, that hovers in the top right of the painting, reads in translation, "Here you see us, me, Frida Kahlo, with my dearest husband, Diego Rivera." Yet, note the crisscrossed out of sync stairs and the slowly unclasping hands. Scholars say wandering eyes, extramarital affairs, what's going on? Also note the tension depicted in their different choices of dress. His European clothing and her Mexican dress. Move on. This one is called My Birth, 1932, and it is, I would suggest, painfully obstetric, and it is owned by Madonna. Frida's head emerges from the vagina of a mother who, please note, the mother's face is covered like by a shroud, white, but a shroud. And it was most likely painted, this painting, in response to her mother's death. Kahlo had recently returned to Mexico back from Detroit. And even though knowing that her mother was dying, literally on her deathbed, Kahlo refused to visit her mother. And when the body was laid out pre-burial, she refused to go visit and look at her mother's body. Also notice the imagery behind the bed. Certainly not a crucifix or something like that. This is self-portrait along the borderline between Mexico and the United States. And she painted it in 32 while they were in Detroit. And he was eulogizing in a mural in Detroit. He was hired, Detroit Institute, the modernity of industrialization, etc. Kahlo was homesick, and she was unabashedly yearning for the agrarian culture of Mexico, ancient and contemporary. So in this painting, notice how she bifurcates herself, not quite center, but on the right, you see the industrialized USA in Detroit, the Ford River Rouge plant, the skyscrapers, modern inventions. Notice that she has on the right metal ducting, marching as machinery replaced plant life and also note the electrical cords instead of roots at the bottom. On the left, of course, she's sort of in the middle. On the left, there's ancient Mexico's indigenous art, plants, and Aztec iconography with plant roots, real plant roots, running deep into the soil. She placed herself in the middle, and she's a product of both, but not accidentally. She's carrying the Mexican flag. This also was painted in, see if I can get that down, 1932. It was originally named Henry Ford Hospital, but it has been renamed Flying Bed. She became pregnant twice, just before, excuse me, before she married Diego, and she aborted at 3 months, supposedly because of her twisted pelvis. We're not sure. Her second pregnancy ended in a miscarriage. It wasn't on purpose. She had, however, before she miscarried, tried to induce that second pregnancy into abortion by ingesting quinine. Yeah. The third pregnancy was also terminated, quite possibly because it was a lover's child. Kahlo's body really could not bring a child to term. It caused her much grief throughout her life, which became the subject of at least 2 important artworks by her, including this one, painted after her Detroit miscarriage. And you can see why Breton included her in surrealism here. Let's move on. Whoops. And let's look for a moment. Notice the snail up here, embryonic, the baby, all of this connected to her, medical, prosthetic, showing women in the womb and the fetus. She's also umbilically, arterially linked to her broken pelvis, and which holds the womb, and an indigenous flower, as well as machinery. And the skyline is, of course, industrialization. This is Frida and Diego in Mexico in 1933. It's a Muncaci photo of them. Martin Muncaci photographed them a number of times. This is a Lucien Bloch 1933 photo of Kahlo and Rivera, left to right, Rivera and Kahlo at the New Workers' School in New York. Rivera's Lost Mural is, of course, very famous. Painted in 1933, he was commissioned, started painting it by the Rockefellers, RCA building and Rockefeller Center. And it included a portrait of Lenin. He'd been given fairly free carte blanche. He'd shown some sketches and discussed it, but it's Diego Rivera, so it's fine. But when he put the Lenin portrait up, all hell broke loose and the pressure was put on. And he was told to remove it. And he said, absolutely not. He refused. They were communists of the Leninist tradition, and Trotskyites. They certainly were not Stalinists. So what happened at Rockefeller Center when he refused to take out Lenin is they canceled his commission, didn't pay him anymore. And they literally had blasted off of the wall the rest of what he painted. I mean, it was blasted. 1933, they were in New York City, and this is My Dress Hangs There. She makes her loyalties very clear. It's set amidst the skyscrapers of New York, and it ridicules the American obsession with sport and sanitation, placing a toilet and a golf trophy on top of classical columns, both Doric. With Rivera in New York, Kahlo did, however, make a lot of art contacts. She met Georgia O'Keeffe, for instance, and Stieglitz. Lots of dealers and lots of gallery owners. Later, these connections that she made would lead to her successful New York exhibition at the Julien Levy Gallery, and that was in 1938 when she showed there. So here we have the golf trophy. She thought that was a ridiculous game. Kind of is if you think about it. Sanitation with the toilet, a little Mae Westy look here, and her dress, again, the Mexican hanging in the middle of it, and some dismembering over here. This is a photograph of her sister, and her sister's name gets spelled differently by different scholars, CH or CR, but she married, Cristina Kahlo married Y Calderón, and her dates of life are 1908 to 64. Again, she's only 11 months younger than Frida when she's born. This is Cristina with her son Antonio, 8 months after he was born. So back to Kahlo. In 33, homesick in the US, she really kept bugging Diego and said, please come, let's go back home. And he was reluctant, but he agreed, and they returned to Mexico. And he wasn't happy about it, even though he'd agreed. And he retaliated by having an affair with her sister, Cristina. Kahlo was devastated, and she began painting herself wounded and bleeding. Most sources say that Kahlo's own extramarital affairs follow Rivera's affair with Kahlo's younger sister, Cristina, but this is not true. Among others, Kahlo had already had an affair with Nicholas Murray, the photographer, as early as 1931. So particularly some of the early feminist scholarship, not now, but early feminist scholarship made allegations that just couldn't be supported. So we have to be careful who we point fingers at, right? This is a photo, you recognize Trotsky in here, with Kahlo, there in the center, he on the left, she's on the right, and John van Huysenoort, and this is circa 1937. Notably, Kahlo seduced Trotsky's secretary, Jean van Huysenoort, after she was done having her affair with Trotsky. Yeah, you know. Her family tree. Let's talk about that a little more. You are looking at, so I can get these things out of the way, my grandparents, my parents, and I. It's usually referred to as family tree, painted in 1936. And you can see again this vasculation, or this isn't umbilical here because she's very young in the middle, but her mother was mestiza, mixed. And of course, the castas, the most detailed caste system that has ever been created, was created by the Spanish in New Spain, Roman Catholic and Spanish conquerors in New Spain, which is Mexico and Guatemala. Literally, if you have sex with this person, this is what we're going to name. The castas paintings are incredible. It's the most detailed caste system the world has ever seen. So she was, and everybody is pretty much aware of that. And she was mother Mexican mestiza, mix. Her father was a German immigrant, the son of Hungarian Jews. So this bloodline is at the root of divided loyalties. On the one hand, her indigenous culture of her native Mexico, even though she gets that from her mother, who she's not particularly fond of. And on the other, her ties to Europe. Note that the couple, who resemble Kahlo's parents and are right above her, will later appear in her painting in 1938 of What the Water Gave Me. And then she's got the grandparents, the abuelas, and on both sides of her. And we've also got some city here, but a lot of indigenous plant life there on the lower left. Another picture of Trotsky, Frida, and Trotsky's wife. Kahlo and Rivera were Trotskyites. Trotsky and his wife were, you probably know the story, on the run. They'd spent time, and you can still visit where they lived for a while in Turkey, but Stalin wanted them dead, and they had assassins after them pretty much everywhere. After several years in Turkey, then in France, then in Norway, Rivera convinced the Mexican president, Lázaro Cárdenas, to offer Trotsky political asylum in Mexico. Trotsky and his wife, that's his wife on the left, Natalia Sedova, boarded an oil tanker and docked in Tampico Bay, Mexico, on the 9th of January, 1937. Rivera was sick, genuinely so, not fake sick. And Kahlo was the one who greeted them at the port of Tampico. Kahlo and Rivera offered the Trotskys their second home. And that's the famed Casa Azul, which, if you've been to Mexico City, you can take the bus straight out to it. It takes a while, but you can. They had taken care of Casa Azul, knowing, of course, the danger that the Trotskys were in. They'd equipped it with guards. They'd barricaded it. had built barricades. They'd covered the windows. They had alarm systems, state of the art at the time, to ensure their political heroes' safety. Kahlo and Trotsky, as I'd mentioned, had a very short-lived affair. It was Natalia Sedova-Trotsky who gave her husband an ultimatum. But Kahlo is the one who actually ended the affair. And she's reported to have said, "I am tired of the old man." So she preempted the end of it. And of course, you know, but I put in here just in case you've forgotten, it was the summer of 1940 when he was killed with an ice pick. They actually jailed Frida Kahlo for that. I mean, how ridiculous, but they did, and she got out, of course. She was certainly not guilty. This is another of her self-portraits, and it's very unusual. It's dedicated to Leon Trotsky, and it was painted in 1937. It's oil on masonite. And she rarely gave lovers any of her art. But she did gift Trotsky with this self-portrait after their affair ended. In it, you can see her cradling a small but lovely triangulated bouquet, and she's holding a letter, and we can read it. It says, to Leon, translation, "To Leon Trotsky with all my love, I dedicate this painting on 7 November 1937, Frida Kahlo in San Angel, Mexico." So very unusual to have given this to Trotsky. Again, he was their hero politically. It's also rubbing salt in Natalia's wounds, which of any person in the world, Frida would know how that would feel. This is a Manuel Alvarez Bravo photograph of her from 1937, approximately. We're not really sure, 36 maybe, 38. And it simply is titled Kahlo Paints. And again, she's in pain a lot of her life. She recuperates from a lot of surgeries. She's often either in bed, in a wheelchair, in a chair. She hated being in a wheelchair, but would, you know, let them, only if she could have some mobility. This is an amazing piece, one that I keep coming back to. It's My Nurse and I, 1937. Kahlo was literally wet nursed by an indigenous wet nurse because her own mother could not breastfeed her. When women get pregnant again, their lactation stops. So had to find a wet nurse, and she got an indigenous person to do that. The wet nurse was fired later because she drank on the job. It doesn't make for the best employee. The relationship between Frida and the nurse is really interesting in this painting, odd. It seems incredibly cold and distant. There's no embracing. The woman is masked, and Frida has the Frida adult head. Stormy, rainy clouds in the back, and indigenous plant life. Here's a black and white of it. As a baby, it's odd that she has the head. That's an adult Frida. And the nurse, as I said, is wearing a mask. It is pre-contact, pre-Columbian, Mesoamerica, we could say. And the nurse is wearing this that covers entirely her face. It implies her feelings of loss and separation from her own mother, perhaps. She herself wrote about this painting, "I am in my nurse's arms with the face of a grown-up woman and the body of a little girl, while milk falls from her nipples as if from the heavens." And again, note the falling of the precipitation from the heavens. It's very interesting, and, you know, complexity of all of her relationships in her life just can never be overstated. This is What the Water Gave Me. I referred to it earlier, and you see her parents in this again. Many people call this her biography. I think that's probably a little overstated, but not much. Her toes point up from the water in the bathtub and are reflected back into the water. Note the wounded right foot. Her feet dominate the painting, and along with an underwater view of her thighs, that's all that can be seen of her in this self-portrait. In the water float remnants of her life. There's an island, which holds a volcano erupting as a skyscraper. There's a dead woodpecker perched on a tree. And there's a small skeleton resting, if you can say a skeleton rests, on a hill. From this island, there's a tightrope which begins, and it creates a diamond-like shape within the center of the tub and eventually wraps around the neck of a naked female figure who's floating, sort of lower, almost left center. From this female figure, do you see the triangulation there, right, between it? From this female figure floating with the rope around her neck, which may represent Kahlo herself, the rope returns into the hand of a faceless man lounging on the edge of the island. He seems to be watching the woman that he is strangling in the distance. He's just observing the strangulation as he pulls. Very complex. Also floating in the bathtub, you note there's a Mexican dress. There is a seashell, but it's full of bullet holes. There's a couple who, as I said, resemble her parents from her earlier painting from 36, my grandparents, my parents, and I. And there are also, lower right, two female lovers who later reappear in a painting she paints in 1939 called Two Nudes in a Forest. This is the frame from 1938. In this unusual self-portrait by Kahlo, she's experimenting with what we call mixed medium. The self-portrait that you see in the center is painted on a sheet of aluminum, but that border around her of birds and flowers is painted on the backside of a piece of glass that she then laid on top of the portrait on the aluminum. It's notable as the first work by a 20th century Mexican artist to be purchased by a major international museum. It was acquired by the Louvre in 1939. It now shows at the Musée National des Arts Modernes in the Centre Pompidou in Paris. And you've got to see the live art. It just pops with the mixed medium, but also the colors just really come at you. This is from 1938, and it's a still life. It's called Fruits of the Earth. This painting is the largest one among the several still life paintings that Kahlo produced in later life. The sky is in the background. Let me pull this out of your way a little bit so you can see some of that. I don't know why this isn't disappearing for you, but look at that tumultuous sky. It's just incredible. She really loves tumultuous skies. The sky is bright blue when it was first painted, but she later repainted it and changed it to this dark, gloomy sky to reflect her emotions. It resembles the style of an incredible precursor painter in Mexico on whose shoulders, to some extent, Frida stood, Mercedes Zamora, and those are her dates. She was born in 1865, died in 1922. Kahlo adored Zamora's art. And Zamora in 1896 had a similar still life to this one that Kahlo produces in 1938. It's not exactly the same, but it's very reminiscent. This is one of the still life paintings that depicts fruit on the table by her bedside. She liked to have open or fruit cut. She called them wounds on the fruit, as she depicted openings or wounds on her own body in her self-portraits. The fruits are, of course, full of sexual metaphors, and some people just, jump off the cliff with that, right? As they do with O'Keeffe. But also lots of allusions to the cycles of life and death, which, of course, women particularly, not only, but with the preponderance of early miscarriages that women have and often don't talk about, Frida's own problems with fertility and carrying babies. This is clearly part of that in the mix here. But the opened fruit, for her, she called them often wounds. It also, by her bed, when she was in bed, made it easier for her to eat, right? You've cut the fruit for her. So it's practical as well. Look at the tumultuous sky on this with blue. It's called Girl with Death Mask. Isn't that a cheerful theme? 1938. And she painted two similar paintings with this same subject. It depicts a little girl. Most people believe it's Frida herself at the age of 4, wearing a skull mask. This would be at for the Dia de los Muertos celebration. So it has a different meaning, of course, in Mexico than it does to people not familiar with Dia de los Muertos. And it's traditional at the annual festival, Day of the Dead, where death is celebrated instead of mourned. The little left out girl, the little girl is holding a yellow blossom in her hands, the right hand, and it resembles the taguete bloom that Mexicans put on graves at the festival when they go to commune, talk to, eat with their ancestors. She stands on an empty, vast, the little girl, on an empty, vast field under an extremely gloomy sky, all by herself. By her feet, to her left, our right, is a carved wooden tiger mask, which is similar to one hanging in the dining room of Frida's house, Casa Azul. Both masks don't really seem appropriate for the innocence of a tiny little girl. They hint at the cruelty of her destiny. Oops. Now we've stopped sharing again. How do we get that back up? There we go. Yeah, okay. So this is another Nicholas Murray photo of her, Frida Kahlo with magenta rebozo, hand-loomed scarf from 1939. Here we have another of her paintings, the two Fridas, painted in 1939, and it was completed shortly after the divorce came in effect. It was the first large-scale work done by Kahlo and shows two different personalities of herself. The traditional Kahlo in Tejuana costume with a broken heart, sitting next to the independent, modernly dressed Kahlo. In her diary, Kahlo wrote that this painting originated from her memory of an imaginary childhood friend. Later, she admitted that this painting also expressed her desperation and her incredible loneliness with the separation and then divorce from Rivera. Note that the two women, two parts of herself, are holding hands. They both have visible hearts, and the heart of the Frida Kahlo wearing a traditional dress is cut and torn open. The main artery, which comes from that torn heart down to the right hand of the traditional Kahlo, we see her on the left, is cut off by surgical pincers held in the lap of the traditional Kahlo. But the blood keeps dripping on her white dress, and she is in danger of bleeding to death. The stormy sky, again, this time not blue, but back to the darker grays and a little black, but mostly dark grays, have agitated clouds, and they clearly reflect her pain, inner turmoil, etc. It's hard to mistake that, right? Here we see these two lovers again, not in the bathwater, but this is the one I referred to earlier. The Earth Itself is the title. It can also be called Two Nudes in a Jungle, and some people string them all together. Painted in 1939. It also is referred to by some people as The Earth, Two Nudes in the Wood. Other people refer to it as My Nanny and I. Might be. This painting was given to a woman who was an intimate companion of Kahlo's, who some believe to be the actress Dolores del Rio. Frida never tried to hide her what we would call bisexuality. These are two naked women sitting in the forest. The light-skinned woman rests on her head on the dark-skinned woman's lap. They are watched by a monkey, which is an indigenous traditional symbol of negativity, devil or sin, if we use Roman Catholicism's language. Some scholars suggest this painting isn't sexual at all, but shows the aspects of her duality, the European, the indigenous, the comforter, the one being comforted. It can be read, I think, in all of those ways fairly. I don't think we have to only interpret it in one way. I think that would do it an injustice, actually. And as I said, the two lovers, if they are lovers, appeared earlier in What the Water Gave Me. We are more comfortable nowadays of talking about her bisexuality and her lovers traditionally, particularly in Mexico, they did not talk about this much, unless they were saying something scathing about her, including her politics. Oops. Do that again. There we go. Let me try to pull it down. Self-portrait with cropped hair, 1940. And I want you to note up here, set to music, what this reads, right? Mira que si te quise, and she goes on. So this is to be sung, to be read and sung. What is going on here? She returns from Paris in 1939, and she has been, Diego meets her and demands a divorce. Welcome home, we're getting divorced. He was having a well-known, well-publicized affair with the American actress Paulette Goddard. Some of you remember her from the films. By then, Goddard had moved across the street from Diego's studio, and it was just, I mean, everybody knew about it. It was obvious. Kahlo mourned the separation. She cut off her hair. By the way, she did the same thing, cutting off her hair. And we don't mean getting a haircut. We mean hack, 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 hack. She also did this when she found out that Diego had slept with her sister. She painted herself this time with her shorn, and she called it desexed. She described herself, in fact, to Nicholas Murray as I look like a fairy. And that's that slang term for a gay man. We don't tend to use that now. My mother's would call a fairy Irish, but that's a different sort. She's typical to her. She's wearing men's clothing, but you'll note that clothing doesn't fit her here. This is very baggy clothing, capacious enough to fit Diego. It's a curious case of identification with the aggressor. She then begins to paint more self-portraits. This is her self-portrait with thorn necklace and hummingbird, 1940. She painted this after the divorce came through with Diego, and at the end of her affair, she also was having an affair at the time with photographer Nicholas Murray. She faces the viewer with the background of those large green leaves and a yellow leaf right behind her on her left. The thorns are around her neck like a necklace, which is held by a black monkey. Her neck is bleeding from the piercing of the thorns. On the right side behind her shoulder, our right, her left, is a black cat. And notice that there's a hummingbird hanging on the thorn, which knots around her throat. Her expression, despite the bleeding, etc., is incredibly calm and solemn. One might say stoic. It also seems she is patiently enduring all the pain. Symbolic elements express her feelings. There's a bird there, the hummingbird, that often symbolizes freedom and life, especially hummingbirds, colorful, hovering, moving over flowers. But in this painting, that is not what it represents. The hummingbird is black and it's lifeless, and it's been, pierced to hang on this necklace, if you will. This may, in fact, the hummingbird be a symbol of Frida herself and her suffering. So she looks stoic, but this is what really is going on. Another Murray photo of her from 1940. He was, by the way, a pioneer in color photography. Another quote from Kahlo: "I drank to drown my sorrows, but the damned things learned how to swim." 1940, they'll remarry, and Murray took this photo as well, and it is Diego and Kahlo. And I put in here from her diary. Some people call this a poem. I'm not sure. Diego equals my husband. Diego equals my friend. Diego equals my mother. Diego equals my father. Diego equals my son. Diego equals me. Diego equals the universe. You'll notice in there this conflation of good and bad, right? Father good, mother not so good, she didn't have a good relationship with, she never had a son. Interesting. This is the year she ended her, not the only time she was sexually active with Murray, but she ends it and remarries Rivera. This is also a Murray photo from 40, and she's had another surgery, and she's back in traction. Really painful stuff. And there she is with her beautiful, she always insisted, even when she couldn't do it, that somebody else comb the mustache and the unibrow. She's very proud of them. Here we have her with a dear friend. Diego took this photo in 41, and it's Kahlo on the left and Emmylou Packard, yes, of Packard fame, money and fame. And in this photo, Emmylou Packard is approximately 27. So this would be about 14 years after Kahlo and Emmylou met for the first time. Emmylou Packard was a Californian, a post-war artist known for painting, printmaking, and murals. She had a passion for the cause of social justice and peace. She was born in 1914 near El Centro to Emma and Walter Packard. And you probably know, her father made his money, founded an agricultural cooperative community in the Imperial Valley. He was an internationally known agronomist, and his politics were very left-leaning. It's a co-op. In 1927, the Packard family traveled to Mexico because he'd been offered and paid for a consulting job with the Mexican government to work on agrarian and land settlement reform issues. Emmy was 13 years old during the trip, already active as an artist, which her parents encouraged. And her mother then introduced her 13-year-old daughter, Emmy, to Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo. And this was the beginning of a very long friendship and mentorship between Kahlo, particularly, and Emmylou. They were really good friends. Again, this is about circa 14 years after they met. This is a photo that Emmylou Packard took in 41 of Rivera seated and Kahlo. And this is in their kitchen dining room, Kahlo standing above him, wearing work pants. This is a photo by Bernard G. Silberstein from 1943. It's a precious photo. It shows Kahlo seated and painting, working on a piece of art called The Wounded Table. Why is that a precious photo, as is this? Let me see if I can move this down. She donated it to the former Soviet Union. It was an oil painting, and they lost it in 1955. 3 photos of this painting were taken between 1940 and 1944. I've just shown you 2. Kahlo started working on this painting as an expression of her despair and loneliness during the end of 39 to the beginning of 40, separation, divorce, before the remarriage, and when the divorce was being finalized. Notice that the blood is dripping, literally dripping in the wounded table, as it was dripping on Frida's Tijuana skirt in the 2 Fridas. This is her only other large painting, and not just size makes it large, but also its complexity. In a letter to Murray, she described working like hell to finish it to meet the deadline of January 17th for the opening of the International Exhibition of Surrealism. So no, she didn't like to be called a surrealist. She thought Breton was insufferable. She loved his wife, but yeah, she wanted to be in those shows. The Wounded Table, before being given to the Soviet Union, was displayed with other elite surrealist artists' masterpieces. For instance, Dali's Persistence of Memory showed at that show. And René Magritte's The Treachery of Images also opened that show. So we've got these photographs. That's all that we have left. Here's the second one again. The table has human legs, notice. And its surface, as I said, is bleeding on the knots, the knots of wood. It's a symbol of her sense of broken family from the divorce. There are several objects around the table. Notice that Kahlo is in the center and surrounded by all the objects accompanying her. On one side is her sister Christina's 2 children, which is a reflection of Kahlo's own desire to have her own children. On the other side, notice the deer, a young fawn, actually. And that was one of her favorite pets. And she would call them her surrogate children. Some people do that with their animals, right? Sitting right next to her is a Nayarit figure, indigenous. The tall Judas figure, let me see if I can move this down again. The tall Judas figure, most everyone concludes is Diego de Rivera. They asked her about it. She never really answered, but he's playing the role of the betrayer. Looking back on the divorce, because he was asked about this overtly, I mean, these people lived very publicly. Rivera did admit his wrongdoing. And this is a quote. He said, "I simply wanted to be free to carry on with any woman who caught my fancy. Was I simply the depraved victim of my appetites?" He asked rhetorically. So she arranges these characters in a scene that recalls The Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci. This is not an accident. This is Roots, painted in 43. About this painting, Kahlo stated her faith, not in Roman Catholicism, but her faith that all life can join in a single flow. She's depicted as her torso opens up like a window and gives birth to a vine. It's her dream of being able to give birth, childless woman that she is. Her blood circulates the vine and reaches beyond the leaves, veins, and feeds the parched earth. She's dreaming to be a tree of life with her elbows supporting her head on a pillow. Her mother did have her, in school and stuff. She was familiar with Roman Catholicism and raised in it, though she wasn't a believer. But she, you're raised in it. So she has a Catholic religious background. And it's possible she's also trying to mimic Christ's sacrifice of having her blood flowing through the grapevine, if you will. This implication of being a sacrificial victim is also reflected in other paintings. So it's not stretching too far in this one. It's an incredible piece. The terrain is just amazing. And the open cavern and the grove. It can also be compared, this painting, with My Nurse and I, as these are the reversal of each other. In My Nurse and I, Kahlo is a baby fed by the Mexican woman with breasts that look like plants. In Roots, this one, it is adult Frida who is nourishing the Mexican earth. But in this painting, there is some danger to the artist's fulfillment dream. Notice there's a crevasse opening next to Frida on the ground. Whoops. Side note, in May 2006, this painting was auctioned at Sotheby's in New York and sold for $5,616,000, which set a new record for any of Kahlo's art. It was sold to an anonymous phone bidder. Rumors in the art world say it was Madonna. That has yet to be verified. Oops. This is a photo taken by Fritz Henley in 1943, and it's Kahlo again in Casa Azul, seated, working on her art, the artist at work. This was completed, this painting, in 1943. It's her self-portrait, again as Tejuana, begun in 1940, but not completed till 43. Many people refer to this as Diego on My Mind. Proper title is Tejuana. She began it in 40 during the brief break between their divorce and their remarriage. Note the traditional lace Mexican dress surrounded really surreally by a shadow of web-like fibers that appear to crack the work's invisible pane, as if her facade or she or both are broken. At the very center of the impact is her miniature bust of Diego, emblazoned on her forehead like an elaborate third eye, a common symbol of inner vision. Her own seeing, again, remember those diary entry, that diary entry is of Diego and through him. Told you I'd show you this later, not in black and white. The Broken Column, it's oil on masonite from 1944. It was painted shortly after she had yet another spinal surgery to correct all the ongoing problems. At the time of the painting, Kahlo was required to wear this steel corset as opposed to the regular plaster casts that she had previously worn. More breathability here, but painful. The deep, jagged fissure along the length of her near naked torso allows viewers to see her spine, but the spine is a cracked, ruptured, ionic column, close to collapse. I mean, it's teetering, particularly at the base. Also notice there are nails of various sizes that pierce her entire body, and the tears are running freely down her cheeks. Now, she originally painted this without the covering on the lower half. It was in a complete nude when she originally painted it, only with her wearing the banded medical support corset, metal corset. She later added the white surgical looking sheet to cover her lower half. She didn't explain why. Despite the clear agony of this piece, there is a look of strength and defiance in that face. And she's got her head up, her chin up, literally and figuratively. Estar clavado is slang, and it means to be nailed or to be cheated on. Diego cheating on her. He's nailing somebody else. He's cheated on me. So estar clavado. This is estar clavado. I love this photo. This is by Manuel Alvarez Bravo, really good photographer. Oops, just trying to bring it down so we can see the Picasso. Photos taken in 1944, and there was a Picasso exhibit in La Ciudad de Mexico, and she was there. And here she is choosing to have her photo taken in front of this wonderful Picasso. I hope you've seen this live somewhere. It's just exquisite blues. Just pops. We don't know who took this photo in 1946, but we do know it was 1946. And this is Kahlo seated, leaning against her sister, the younger sister, Cristina. This is Frida in the streets in 1946 with people in Mexico City. Here's a photo by Antonio Kahlo, her nephew, that he took in 1947. Hector Garcia, who was a photojournalist in Mexico, took this in 1949. And here she is, of course, in bed, oops, reclining. Whoa, let's go back. Didn't mean to do that. No. It keeps going forward. Let's go back. There we are. To her in bed, where, she resided a lot. And this closes in on her, so you don't see that she also had in the bed with her things to draw, paint, color with, of course. She would never be without those. As with self-portrait as They Wanna, this 1949 painting entitled Diego and I depicts the migration of Diego from an imposing physical presence beside her in earlier paintings to Diego as an integral component of her very being. Note the tears. Whatever their difficulties and the tears, she has come to see Diego as the very lens through which she perceives reality. Diego has a third eye as well. So she has a third eye, she's crying, and Diego, who's on her, Diego and I, he has a third eye. Both of them are creative, highly, of course, and creatively intertwined, really in some ways inextricably so, although their art, of course, is extricable. She painted this amid rumors, lots of rumors that Diego would soon abandon her for yet another Hollywood starlet. This is her studio, a photo taken in 1949. And I slammed this together. This is Museo Casa Estudio Diego Rivera y Frida Kahlo. It's the home that Frida and Kahlo shared, and you can visit it. It still has one of Rivera's jackets flung over a wicker chair, some works in progress still on easels. And they're also open, you're not allowed to leaf through them, but they're open sketchbooks, diaries, some of her colorful indigenous costumes, and the extravagantly decorated living quarters. And by extravagant, we don't mean expensive, but we mean lots and lots of stuff and bright colors. Certainly wasn't monetarily extravagant. This is the love embrace of the universe, the earth, Mexico, myself, Diego, and Senor Xolotl, painted in 1949. As the years went on, let me see if I can pull that one down without stopping sharing again. Get that out of the way. As the years went on, she took more and more of a motherly role in relation to Diego Rivera, her husband. He loved to be pampered. He was quite narcissistic, as you can tell. And she discovered that playing mother made it easier to indulge his mischief. It gave her, I guess, a little bit of emotional distance. Just as she could scold him also when he dropped his underwear on the floor or gobbled 3 scoops of pistachio ice cream, she could laugh at his sexual misadventures. She confided her maternal feelings in her journal. At every moment, she wrote, "He is my child born every moment, diary from myself." In her essay, Portrait of Diego, written for the catalog of Rivera's 1949 retrospective at Mexico City's Palace of Fine Arts, Kahlo wrote, quote, "Women, among them I, always would want to hold him in their arms like a newborn baby." And that's what she does in that self-portrait. The love embrace of the universe, the earth, Mexico, Diego, me, and Senor Xolotl, is a self-portrait that celebrates the final resolution of the Rivera's marriage or stage or whatever you want to call it. Here, she's the earth mother, the Madonna, not the singer Madonna, nurturing the baby she could never have. She called him her Dieguito. Now she doesn't need to clasp him tightly, for the couple's union is sustained by a series of love embraces that roots them in the Mexican earth. Go back to that, right? Not a real tight clasp, it's loose. Even Frida's dog, Xolotl, is encompassed by this vast interlocking pyramid of love. See her dog, really sweet. Yet for all Kahlo's contentment in possessing her spouse, she knew, as she wrote in 1949, that, quote, "Diego has never been and never will be anyone's husband." In this painting, she looks extremely calm, but tears dot her cheeks. Couldn't blow it up enough for you. And there's a bright red crevasse that cracks open her neck and chest. Do you see that? Bleeding down the middle. From it, a fountain of magical, I suppose, milk sprays forth. In sympathy, the Mexican earth has also a cracked breast from which one, whoops, wrong way, drop of milk appears. So you see that, it's not the nurse here, that's Mother Earth behind her. And one milk drop coming from on our right, but the figure's left breast nipple. The baby, Dieguito Rivera, holds an orange maguey plant, which looks like fire and might stand for what Kahlo called she called it his fountain flower. She meant his penis. Or it might stand for the fire of his genius, rooted in Mexican soil. In Portrait of Diego, and that's the essay written for the catalog, she described Diego. His bulging, wide-set eyes, she said, were, quote, "constructed especially for a painter of spaces and multitudes." And the third eye opened in his forehead is the invisible eye of, she called it Oriental wisdom. We don't use the word Oriental anymore. It's quite racist, of course. You should read Edward Said's Orientalism if you wonder why. And his Buddha-ish mouth, these are quotes, Oriental and Buddha-ish, notice his third eye here. Buddha-ish mouth is set in, quote, "an ironic and tender smile," little ellipsis. Diego is an immense baby with an amiable face and a slightly sad glance. So she's describing him. This is a photo taken by, with her doctor by Giselle Freund in 1952. And notice that it's a portrait photo with her painting, which is on our left, which includes her painting a portrait of her doctor. So it's a portrait within a portrait within a portrait. It's a triplicate here, a trio. Here's a photo by Juan Guzman of Kahlo and Rivera taken in 1952. And what you're looking at is part of his mural, Nightmare of a War, Dream of Peace. 1952, of course, in the United States was during what we call the Korean War, which has never really ended. Rivera was commissioned to paint a portable mural for a Mexican art exhibition in Paris. He chose as the subject The Nightmare of War and Dream of Peace, and it caused an international scandal. It is, in fact, a painting within a painting. It's a mural of a mural. On a wall in some Mexican city is painted the political mural. We would love to find it. We hope it's still there someplace. Just paint it over and maybe they'll find it. This mural ends 3/4 of the way to the right, ending along the wall that it's painted on. Beyond the end of the building is a panoramic view of the modern Mexican city with its bustling traffic, high-rise buildings, and billboards. So he meant that external view to be part and parcel with the painting, modernism. I mean, just wonderful. If we didn't know how modernist and Mexican he was in Japan, we would say that's Japanese, the inclusion of the exterior with the interior. But this is modernism for Diego. In front of the mural, in the front, there's a load of inhabitants of the city being moved along the pavement from right to left. They're being handed copies of the Stockholm Appeal. If you don't know what that is, I'll tell you in a minute, by a man in a black suit at the far right, by Rivera's wife. She's in there on the right, behind him, the live Diego in the photo. And she's in a wheelchair in the mural and, of course, in the photo. And she is the fulcrum of the action. And two men standing behind a makeshift table are persuading citizens, peasant, smart-suited urban types, to add their names to the Stockholm Appeal petition. Joliot-Curie is to the left of the central worker facing us. He's the one with the black beret on the left there. Stockholm Appeal, in case you've forgotten it since high school or college. The Stockholm Appeal was a short, simple text launched in 1950, which called for an absolute ban on all nuclear weapons. The appeal was launched by the French communist physicist Frédéric Joliot-Curie, and the petition gathered, we suppose, a supposed 273,470,566 signatures. Here is a known photograph, 1953 Kahlo, and she's lying down. But she's at her first solo exhibition that they ever gave her in Mexico City. And by God, she wasn't going to miss it. She was ill and hospitalized. Gangrene was ravaging her body. They were amputating parts of it, and it kept going. And they said, absolutely no, you're not leaving the hospital. You're too ill. It could kill you. And she said, I'm going, get me there. So they put her on a stretcher and they carried her in. After her amputation, that time, with typical Kahlo dark humor, she said about Rivera's mistress, Dolores del Rio, I will send her my leg on a silver tray as an act of vengeance. Here she is in 1954. Her last public appearance was 11 days before her death on July 13th, 1954. She was in a wheelchair at Diego's side, and they were protesting the intervention of the United States in Guatemala, CIA-led. Nothing would stop her from her politics or her art. She was only 47 when she passed away. He painted this, or drew this, after her death. He drew this after her death. And there she is. Her corpuscles, her arteries, her roots, her Tehuana, indigenous styles. And this was done after she died. So we can end there. Yeah. There we go. I know. Yeah, she wouldn't have liked it. She didn't have her mustache there. All right, preguntas. Questions, anybody? Go ahead.
Do you think she would have, how do you think she would have continued to paint?
How would she have continued to paint had she lived long? I think in the same venue. Yeah. Same, you know, she's so amazing with her self-portraiture, the pain. I would assume more of the maternal of Dieguito would have come out. But seeing herself inextricably connected to her indigenous roots, I don't think would ever have changed, nor her love of Mexico.
What was her cause of death?
Her body just wore out. Infection, gangrene. I mean, she just collapsed. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing she lived that long.
Did she reconcile with her sister?
She did, and I didn't mention that, but yeah, hard to believe, really, for some of us, but she and her sister did reconcile, absolutely. Just as she and Diego reconciled. You know, that capacity, you know, is an individual capacity. And she was able to some extent to compartmentalize, but also one knows that writing things out, painting things out, etc., helps as well. And she certainly was prolific regarding that. So, and unsparing and unflinching in what she spoke about too. So she had her journals, she had her art.
Marie Lewin has a question.
Marie, you have a question?
Yes, my name is Marie Lewin. You mentioned several times that the mother-daughter relationship was not ideal, to say the least. But there's so much research about what goes on between the mothers and daughters now. So what is the conjecture of why Frida didn't like her mom or her mom didn't like her child?
Question about the complexity of her relationship with her mom and that they weren't close and all of that. You know, we can always armchair psychoanalyze everybody else but ourselves, right? And especially when they're dead. And it's really kind of unfair to do that. But a couple of things are obvious. There was and there is something to be said for nursing a child and creating a bond that way. That said, it can be overstated as well. If one doesn't nurse a child, that doesn't mean one doesn't have bonding with a child. And all you have to do is look at people who've been adopted by other folks or, you know, given the bottle instead of nursed. So some people have tried to speculate that, and that's a blame laying thing. I'm not sure that's fair. Other people simply point out, most scholars simply point out how much like her father she was. And he adored her. She was her father's daughter, and he encouraged her, assisted her as much as he could, got her on her path. I mean, their relationship was just incredible. So that was much stronger is obvious. Now, what the animosity or the problem with her mother was on other levels, we just don't know for sure. Parent-child relationships can be pretty complex. Whether they be same gender parent or opposite gender parent. It does tend to be true that we tend to identify more with opposite sex parents, but that's not always true. So again, you know, armchair psychoanalyzing her, you know, don't know, but the closeness of her relationship and his encouragement of her always in every way never ceased. He was remarkable with her. They had an incredible bond. So I don't know if we have any father's daughters in the room, but when you're a father's daughter, that's a pretty special thing, and mom can't come close. I can say that personally. Yeah. So just an affinity.
It's interesting that Christina didn't get polio. I mean, they had polio in the household.
Yeah, that no one else in the family got polio is interesting. They knew enough to isolate her, but still. And what a horrendous disease. I have a dear friend who, much older than me, but he had polio as a child and the iron lung and the whole story. And it's just a horrific thing. And it takes a toll also more and more. You know, what did she die of? Her body just fell apart. Polio gets worse and worse and worse. And if you've had any vasculation problems, which she did, polio also can twist those, but your vascular system, parts of it up. They can also do your urethra, twist it. I mean, it's just, polio is a horrendous disease. So, you know, and they didn't know all of that then, right? You know, but, you know, just like they don't know all about COVID now, but with the stuff they're practicing on. So they'll learn more later. Yeah. See.
So I have a question about her surrealism. She
Yeah.
didn't like to be called a surrealist, but did she ever talk about how much she was influenced by surrealists? I mean, where did it come from, that surrealism?
Yeah, she denied that she was influenced by surrealists and that she hated being called it. And part of that was a slap to Breton, who she really didn't like. She found him insufferable. And he probably was to some extent, although brilliant. But her influences are so indigenous that what later in literature gets called magical realism is seen in her art. So it wasn't defined that way, the literature in her time, but that was part of, it's always been part of the oral traditions in what we call Mexico, in the indigenous oral folk traditions that go way back before the Aztec. It goes to the Maya, and even the precursors to the Teotihuacanos. And so she would have known some of that. She would have gotten it from the nurse who, you know, got fired, and then the new one that got brought in, and she, you know, she would have embodied what we would look at in art and literature as Mexico's magical realism. It wasn't called that then, but did she have some influences that were surrealistic? Absolutely, of course she had to. I mean, you know, the photograph of her, that's why I include it with that Picasso exhibit. You know, when you are an artist and you are constantly thinking and absorbing and active mentally in a lot of different areas, there's no way she could not have been influenced by some of it. And she wanted to be in the surrealist exhibits desperately.
Did she know Picasso?
We have no indication that they ever met. But, you know, that'd be an interesting armchair psychoanalysis of the similarities between Picasso and Rivera, not regarding brilliance. Picasso takes that one, but and changing of his forms, but as far as the kind of men they were with the women in their lives. Yeah, I imagine she would have probably made some mincemeat out of him. Yeah, we don't have any indication that they met. Yeah, because that would have been written about. Yeah, wouldn't that have been interesting? Yeah. Yeah, he and Diego could have smoked a cigar together.
So Trotsky was killed with an ice pick. I hope by someone that Lenin sent out to.
Yeah. There were.
In the house.
Yeah, they got into the house. Yeah, it's an amazing story, but I mean, you know, there's only so much security, and it was somebody who came in as a worker, you know, and got in and did the deed, and you know, and there were many other attempts. I mean, Trotsky knew. I mean, his time was limited. It's just a matter of how long before he.
Didn't Trotsky live around the corner? I've been to the house.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you said.
They had two homes right in that area. Oh yeah, the question is about the ice pick killing of Trotsky and how did it happen and stuff. He was a worker who got in, and it happened very quickly. There had been others who'd gotten in and they'd seen it coming down and stopped him. I mean, there were guards around, so you know, it's just there was no way to stop that at all. Yeah. Once the ideology fractured with the communist revolution, which really wasn't communist. It's what we call communism, but it never was the idealisms of real communism. We've never seen that in the world. We've seen attempts to try democratic socialism, and every one of them has been in Latin America, and they've been stopped by help from the US CIA. But yeah, what gets called communism, even the ideals, the Trotsky ideals, just, you know, that was a threat to the people who remained in the Soviet Union in power, which is the same kind of hierarchy that we see regardless of style of government or economics. And so it was corrupt. And they had to kill people who were famous, had been part of the revolution, and who were pointing out the corruption. You just can't let those people live.
Are there any later famous Mexican artists who were most strongly influenced by Kahlo?
I don't know of anybody who's not influenced a little bit by Frida Kahlo, but that sense of later we would call it different names. Erica Zhang's book Fear of Flying comes out, and all of a sudden we have this sort of shock value and confessional stuff that comes out, and we continue with that in many ways in our society. In a sense, that's what Frida was doing with her life, but more complexly, because tied to the revolution, the ideals of the revolution, and tied to her indigenous roots, the complexity of what Frida Kahlo was doing, that was some shock value, a word that we coined in the 1970s, late 60s, early 70s, and that everything out there for everybody to see, kind of confessional stuff. It was much more complex than that. So I don't want to reduce it to merely that, because I usually find that kind of stuff, not particularly interesting. But Kahlo's mix of all of those was amazing. And as a woman doing that, particularly in a very male world, not only with Mexican machismo, but the artists' world, because women who were brilliant artists are just now starting to get their recognition from the early modernist movement. And they were at least as good, some of them better, than the men that we study in the art history textbooks still today. And just now, beginning to start to include some of them. So for her to break through as big as she did is incredible. That's why that one early quote that I gave you about the curator who said people pick one part of her and take that, it's really unfair to her, because she's all of those parts. It's the complexity that makes her what she is. And to have her be only one is really unfair and too simplistic in every way. She's just an amazing, she still astonishes us. And when you see her stuff, please see it, some of it live if you can, real art, and not that exhibit that travels around that claims to show all of her work all at once. None of that is her work. It's all painted by other people. And they didn't even advertise that when they first started doing it, and they got sued, and then they had to advertise it, and they put it in the smallest, tiniest print that you can't read. But, I know people, artists, in fact, who go to it and they're like, gosh, I didn't know, the brush strokes were kind of bad. And I'm like, it wasn't her art. So you'd be very careful. But yeah, just to see her stuff is just, you can spend hours in front of one or two of those paintings and just not see all of it. She's just amazing.
Are there any local museums or LA museums that have her art?
LA has, but doesn't always show all of her art. So, it depends on what they've got out, and her art travels. So yeah, we don't own any in San Diego, unfortunately, if you know a benefactor.
Where are the Rivera's murals here in San Diego?
We don't have a Diego mural in San Diego. We did find from the WPA period. What was the one? I can't remember the name of it. San Diego State. Remember, they were doing some maintenance on one of the buildings or reconstruction, and they found it had been hidden from the WPA period. We got a lot of WPA art around. You can go to Balboa Park, outside the Prado restaurant, and you can see that fountain. That's WPA art. So we've got a lot of it. California has a lot of it. Throughout, and people have tried to make lists of it. I don't know if I've ever seen a complete list. That'd be somebody's, project for a doctoral dissertation, and then they'd have to analyze it, not just make a list. That's secretarial work, but, then start analyzing it. Yeah, and of course, a lot of those artists are uncredited. So, yeah, but what a good thing to bolster an economy by giving works to people, including art. Right. Music was being recovered, down south and in the Harlem Renaissance, and, all sorts of stuff was being done to put people at work. The Conservation Corps that redid the parks. That could happen now with our infrastructure. you know, so it's amazing. You know, it's not just art, but other things happen too when you spend tax dollars employing people in bad economies. You know, we can fix things, and we don't have an FDR anymore. I'm not sure we should though, but
These, well, first of all, has to do with how striking Frida Kahlo's reconciliation necessary for life. And is there any hint that, in fact, they were good for her in the sense that these reconciliations fed her art, her work, her creativity, you know, for her?
yeah, the reconciliations are incredible with the sister, with Diego, you know, forever Diego, and with herself. To be able to reconcile is one thing. To be able to reconcile within yourself is an entirely different thing, really. That's a longer journey. And was it good for her art? Absolutely. She used all of it in her art. That's the, and I don't, you know, she's in part confessional, but, you know, much more complex than that, but it absolutely was good with her art. And she and Diego, whatever wasn't good in their relationship, and that's a lot, what was good was there from the very beginning. And that was the creative and the political impulse, both of those things together. They had a meeting of the minds about those things that never waned. Absolutely never. Their creative and their revolutionary political impulses. That was, I mean, when you've got both of those with somebody, that's a pretty strong foundation. You know, the heart vacillates. You know, as I tell my students, love and sex goes up and down, but you've got to have something else that's staying power worth. And to have both of those, that creative impulse and the political, I mean, politics alone could do it for you. Creative impulse could do it alone, but when you've got both of those, you got a big Venn diagram overlap.
And when I spoke about reconciliation, I wasn't speaking about it only in her social,
Yeah.
but which is her whole existence, her reconciliation with her own body.
Right, right. Yes, I'm not sure she ever entirely reconciled with her own body. That early on, there was the quote where the brain was the most important part, and she didn't like anything else except for the mustache and the eyebrows. She really didn't like her own body, but she often, especially with some of the early affairs of Diego Rivera, she would blame herself, and of course, self-blame is something every human being knows intimately, and she learned also to reconcile to get out of that. She also did it in a clear projection kind of way, and also revenge way, which is not healthy, but can work a little bit, but not long. So but the reconciliation with her body, you know, you know, as they start amputating parts of it, she's just like, you know, she just makes jokes. It's like not her.
And that's what I meant. In
Yeah.
other words, suicide is always an alternative. But her reconciliation with the body is that she chose to live and create. She had to do that in order to.
She chose to live, not commit suicide. She chose to create. She also chose 11 days before her death in a wheelchair, sicker than we can imagine, and the pain, to go to a protest for the banning of nuclear war. I mean, that spark, you know, that if I can take, you know, she couldn't take 2 more steps. If I can be rolled there, I'm going to shout for peace around the globe. And that, you know, that's the kind of thing that also Venn diagram overlapped with Diego. The cause is not over, you know, and it isn't.
Her commitment to her creativity, her commitment to life, overcame a lot of her pain. I mean,
Yeah.
And a lot of her work is about, you know, expressions of, you know, working out her pain.
Yeah, I agree. Working out her pain and her commitment to life are very clear. It's one thing to have a survival instinct, which we all do. And it is much more profound than most people realize unless you've been in a situation where it kicks in. I mean, it really is instinctive. That she went far beyond that level because she had a passion for the future, a future she knew she would never fully see. And I think, I mean, as a teacher, I think that myself, that there are things that I will never see that I still will fight for until I die and work toward. And it's okay that I won't see them. It's worth it. you know, it is worth it. And that she had that passion for it. Yeah, absolutely. The Mexico she wanted to see, the world she wanted to see, and the fight goes on. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint.
It's really complex. She's
Yeah.
really committed, very much committed to life.
Yeah.
And
And don't forget, with her commitment to life, her father came from a Hungarian Jewish family who had gone through pogroms and ghettoing. While they weren't religious, even though she had Catholic education, which used to be a good education, I'm not sure it is anymore, but you know, they weren't religious, Jewish or Catholic, but she knows what it is to be in a world that needs some justice.
I think catharsis is those $1,000.
Catharsis, yeah.
She was in every part. It's self-evident.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And she couldn't heal herself, but she could try to make the world better. And she could also relieve cathartically some of her own stuff, but at the same time, always grounding it with that indigenous and the revolutionary. So to put all those together all the time, I mean, you know, what a brain.
Thank you all for coming. This wraps it up.
what's our next one?
So the next one will be in September.
Oh,
Yeah, we're taking a summer break. So this is the last one, summer break, and then we'll start in September. And you, November. Yeah.
For the people on
All
Zoom,
right.
if you would like to receive, be put on the SDIS mailing list or receive information about the recordings, you can send an email to SDISask@gmail, and we will put you on the mailing list or otherwise respond.